Hello, welcome back to another Visual Basic developing session. Today's session will be about building a simple web browser using the .NET framework and also the Internet Explorer framework. So that's .NET as in programming language, which is VB. So it's very simple to do. The IE framework is included as a part of Visual Studio, so it should be really easy to understand and get programming. So I'll go to the PowerPoint here, just brief explanation of what we're covering. We will be covering creating a basic control panel to operate the browser. So that's the back button, forward button, refresh and stop button, the URL entry text box, and also the go button. And then once we've done that, we will be coding the control panel to interact with the Internet Explorer framework in .NET. So with that, it's time to develop. So I'll close down this PowerPoint, it's not needed anymore. I'll open up my Visual Basic or Visual Studio. This is the 2012 Express edition, so I'm running on Windows 8 here. So, but it's still exactly the same for 2010 and 2008 as well. So go ahead and just create a new project. So if it's a little bit slow at times, just Camtasia is recording, so it can be a little bit slow. We would like to have a Windows Form application in Visual Basic. You can see here. And we're just going to call it our simple web browser. Oops, if I can actually type that right. Okay, so it's just going to create the project. Now, in this tutorial, we're not going to worry too much about the actual look of the program, like the UI. We're just going to be This main tutorial is just basically coding it, so what we'll do is just going to slap buttons on with just text and then just stick the web browser on. We're just going to use panels to format it. It's no any fancy work here. Those in later tutorials with more advanced web browsers. So there's nothing too major here with UI. That's all up to you. Or that'll be in an advanced video anyway. So I'm just going to resize this to a suitable size. So that looks okay. I'm just going to resize these as well because they're a little bit big. Go, that looks like rough size, good enough size. So just click on the form here. I'm going to sort it by alphabetical. There we go. Now just the text, just going to change this to my web browser. Anything you want. Just for purposes recording, we call it my web browser. You can give it an icon if you want, but again, I said we're not going to mainly worry about the looks of this. So go over to the toolbox. I always like to go all Windows forms because it's just easier because it shows everything. We're going to want to add two panels. Just add a panel here. We're going to dock that to the top. Resize that slightly. I'm just going to call this the control panel. Oops. There we go for the name. This is where the controls are going to be sitting, and then we're going to drag another panel in, and we're going to dock this one to the full size, to the fill, so that's this square here. I'm just going to name this browser panel. There we go. So we've got two panels here. This is where the controls are going to go, and this is where the actual browser itself is going to go. So we're just going to drag on a few buttons. So start off by just dragging on a simple button. I'm just going to call this one, we're just going to call this one back button with the name. It makes it a lot easier when you name stuff, even though this is only a simple browser. And the text is just going to be back. What we can do is we can now just copy and paste that button rather than have to keep dragging it on each time. This one's going to be, say, forward, and it's going to be called the forward button. Paste another button in. This one is going to be the refresh stop button. It's a bit of a long name. You could just call it refresh button if you wanted to. This is just going to be refresh. This button is going to do both refresh and stop. So it's not too advanced for a basic tutorial. It's not really advanced at all, to be honest. It's just an if statement. And this one's just going to be go, and I believe that will be everything I actually covered in terms of button wise. I'm just going to go down to a text box now, so we're going to add a text box on. Nothing too fancy, just going to line that up there and then just drag that over to here. Obviously in a proper web browser these buttons would obviously look more professional. And this box will just been called, we'll just type this URL address. Okay, so what we have, what we've just done is we've just added the two panels, the control panel and the browser panel, and now we've just added 4 buttons and a text box. So the back, forward, refresh and stop button, the go button, and then the actual text box where we enter our URL. So now what we're going to want to do is we actually just want to go to Toolbox, and you'll see if we scroll down to the bottom there should be a little component called Web Browser. If it's not, then you can just go right click, choose items, and then you can go to the .NET framework components, and this is going to take a while for me because it's the first time I've loaded it, so I'm just going to cancel that. But what you do is you'll just find web browser from the list and tick it and push OK, and then it'll appear here. Drag that into the browser panel. You'll notice it automatically docks to that size. We'll just leave it as web browser 1. In fact, we're just going to call it, yeah, web browser 1. Just leave it as the default name because we're only going to have 1 on there. I'm just going to save it. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is we click on the web browser. We'll scroll down on the properties. I'm going to extend that up slightly. Scroll down to where it says URL. This is the homepage URL it's going to first navigate to when it's loaded up. So I'm just going to go http://google.co.uk. Just very simple homepage. No, you can't change the homepage. Like the user wouldn't be able to change the homepage in this browser, but it's a simple browser. So now that if we was to debug it now, it will go straight to Google. But we're not going to debug it yet. What we're going to do is just double click on the back button so we can get into the code. There we go. So the back button, all it simply is going to be is web browser 1 dot go back. Go. That's the first section done. Just go back. The forward is going to be web browser 1 dot go forward. Oops. Dot go forward. You can just double click these here and it automatically fills it out. When you save it, it'll automatically put the brackets in. Refresh. We will do that in a minute. We're going to quickly go to the go button and just go web browser 1 dot navigate. And then in the brackets, we're just going to put URL address dot text. So this is the name of our text box. We're going to put inside the brackets. I'm going to go over this code in a minute anyway. And then for the refresh button, I'm just going to go refresh button. We are just going to do we need to create a variable. I guess we would need to do that. Let's just see how we can go about doing this. We're going to create a variable to say if the web browser is actually navigating to a page or not. So what we're just going to do is just come here. We'll just move this down a couple of lines. Then in space in between the class and the first private sub, we're just going to create a dim browsing as a boolean equals false. We're just going to do it false by default. Then when we click on the web browser and click on this little lightning strike, we'll get to the advanced section. Document is completed is when the web browser has fully loaded. Navigated is when the navigation occur after it's occurred. Navigating is before the web browser navigation occurs. So if it's navigating, what we're going to do is we're going to set the browsing equals true, and if it's when it's document completed, we're just going to go to browsing equals false. So that's just going to tell the refresh button if the web browser is browsing or not. So if the web browser isn't browsing, then we are, why is that not going up? If the web browser isn't browsing, then we don't need it to stop it, we need it to refresh it. But if it is browsing, then we obviously need it to stop the page from loading. So if browsing equals false, then notice how it puts the end if automatically. We're going to go to web browser 1.refresh, else. Then we go to web browser 1.stop, and there we go. That's all the code we need. So I'll just quickly go over it. For our back button, it's web browser 1.goback. That's self-explanatory there. For the forward button, it's the web browser 1.goforward. Again, self-explanatory. For the button one click, I forgot to name the go button, but it's not too much of a problem. It's just going to be web browser 1.navigate, and then in the brackets you're going to want to put where it's navigating, where it's getting the URL from. So in this case, it's the text box we put here. So whatever text is in this box is what the web browser is going to navigate to. And then we created a variable called browsing, which is a boolean. And when the web browser is navigating, then browsing is going to be true. When the web browser document has completed, it will be false. So browsing is going to be false. And then for the refresh and stop button, if browsing equals false, it's a simple if statement. So if browsing equals false, then the web browser is going to refresh. So it's not browsing, so we want it to refresh. If anything else, so in other words, if it's true, then web browser 1.stop. So that's going to stop the page from loading. So now what we can do, simply hit the green play button, which is the debug button. And then, as you can see here, the web browser has now started up and it is fully loaded. If we was to maximize this, you can see the controls don't resize properly, but again, that's not be covered this in this tutorial. So let's just go to say YouTube, so we can test out the back button. So I'm going to go to back, there we are. For some reason it didn't work the first time, but yeah, yours should. So it went back, and it went back to Google where it just was. If we go to forward, it should go back to YouTube, which it did. Ignore that. Refresh, we're just going to refresh the page. That refreshed fine. Again, ignore the script errors. And if we go to a website, say my blog, when we push the go button, it will go to it, and we want it to. If we hit the refresh button, it should stop the page from loading. And that appears to be all working correctly. Now I did notice that that seems to refresh the page for some reason, but it doesn't matter too much about that variable. I think what it is, you have to change it to when it's document completed. I think you just go through and change it to navigated instead of document completed. But that doesn't matter too much since it's only a simple web browser. You don't even have to have that statement in there, just do .refresh. So that has been it for this tutorial. We've covered creating the controls of the web browser, creating obviously the actual web browser control itself, sort them into two panels, and then we've learned how to code the IE framework. So this web browser you're seeing in here, it's just the exact same framework that's in Internet Explorer. So it is just essentially control the Internet Explorer framework. So that's it for this tutorial. I am going to be writing a blog post up on this, so go ahead and read that if you do get stuck. If you do get any issues, you can just email me at thomas@techiethomas.net. So that has been it for this Visual Basic tutorial. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next installment of the series. Geek out.